Hello everyone, welcome back to Tech Adventure. I hope you're doing great in your journey through software development, embedded systems, and interview preparation. So far, we've covered protocols, microcontroller peripherals, RTOS concepts, C and C++ interview preparation, solid principles, design patterns, and explored the AI series. Today, we're diving into one of the most important and often confusing topics in the embedded world: system-on-chip versus microcontroller. In this video, we'll break it down step by step, from the architecture to the boot sequence, power consumption, and finally, when you should use each in real-world embedded projects. Let's dive in.
Okay, so if you've ever really stopped to think about the brains inside pretty much any modern electronic device, you quickly realize they're not all doing the same job, right? I mean, think about the super fast processor in your smartphone versus, say, the little chip that controls your car's anti-lock brakes. You're basically dealing with one of two key things: a system on chip, an SoC, or a microcontroller, an MCU. And look, for anyone working in embedded systems or even just curious about how this stuff works, getting this difference is, well, it's fundamental. We've gathered a whole stack of technical docs, the kind engineers pore over for embedded software roles. Our goal here today is to cut through all that dense material. We want to give you that shortcut, that essential understanding of the core differences, architecture, performance, and maybe most importantly, the engineering choices that make you pick one over the other. Why choose a power-hungry beast versus a small, reliable workhorse?
Exactly. And it really starts with what they're meant to do. Fundamentally different goals. You look at your phone, your smart TV. The SoC is built for complex general-purpose computing. It's all about high performance, handling lots of data, graphics, running a big operating system like Android or iOS.
Okay.
The microcontroller, though, totally different game. It's built for one specific job, usually. Dedicated real-time control. Think reading a sensor accurately, controlling a motor with precise timing, making sure something happens exactly when it needs to, reliably. It's about predictability and speed for a specific task, not raw general power.
Right. Okay, so let's dig into that a bit. If they both have processing cores, where's the real split in the hardware? What's in SoC packing that an MCU just doesn't have, or maybe the other way around?
Well, the name system on chip gives it away, really. It's trying to be a complete computing system on that single piece of silicon.
Yeah.
So you've got powerful CPU cores, often multiple high-performance ones like ARM Cortex-A series. Sometimes they even mixed in Cortex-R cores for, specific real-time bits within that bigger system. But the big thing is all the other complex blocks they integrate. Heavy-duty GPUs for graphics, dedicated units for processing camera images, ISPs, AI accelerators are common now. It's really a multimedia and application powerhouse.
And the MCU then? I'm guessing simpler, more focused?
What's more focused, yeah. Simplicity and integration are key. It takes the CPU, usually a simpler, lower power core, like an ARM Cortex-M, and crucially, it pulls everything essential for its control task onto that same chip. We're talking the peripherals it needs to talk to the outside world, and the memory.
Okay, that memory point sounds really important, because if an LCU is running, say, Android and processing video, it needs loads of RAM, gigabytes maybe.
Absolutely.
And you can't just cram gigabytes of RAM onto the same tiny chip as the processor easily or cheaply?
Exactly right. So the SoC has to have interfaces to talk to external memory chips. You'll see pins for DDR or LPDDR memory. And it needs connections for big storage, too, like eMMC or USS flash chips. The SoC is always looking outwards for its memory resources. The MCU, totally opposite philosophy. Its program memory, the flash, and its working memory, the SRAM, are built in, right there on the chip. You might only get kilobytes or maybe a few megabytes total, but that self-containment is a huge advantage for simplicity, reliability, and, importantly, startup speed. No waiting to talk to external chips.
And I guess that difference then dictates the kind of peripherals they focus on, and SoC needs to move lots of data fast.
Precisely. You see high-speed stuff, USB 3.0, maybe PCIe for expansion cards, HDMI for video output, fast Ethernet, Wi-Fi controllers integrated. Clock speeds reflect that too, running typically in the gigahertz range, 1 to 3 gigahertz or even more these days.
Whereas the MCU is more about controlling physical things.
Yeah, talking to the real world directly.
Yeah.
So you find simpler functional peripherals, UART for basic serial comms, SBI and ITC for talking to sensors and other chips, ADC's analog to digital converters to read analog sensor values, and PWM's pulse width modulators, which are absolutely essential for things like controlling motor speed or dimming LEDs. Its speeds are much lower, maybe tens or hundreds of megahertz, just enough for the job.
So it's this clear split, high throughput, complex system needing external help versus a self-contained dedicated controller. And that obviously leads straight to what kind of operating system you'd run on them.
Yeah, it dictates it completely. On that big SoC, you pretty much need a complex OS, Linux, Android, maybe a full Windows version to manage all those cores, the gigabytes of memory, the complex peripherals, the multitasking.
Right.
With the MCU, you want to avoid all that overhead. You either run bare metal, basically. Your code runs directly in the hardware, maybe in a simple loop, or use a specialized real-time operating system, an RTOS.
Like FreeTOS or Zephyr.
Exactly, like FreeTOS, Zephyr, ThreadX.
Yeah.
These are designed to be small, fast, and predictable. They manage tasks, but with very low latency and guaranteed timing, which is critical for control applications.
Okay, this is where I think it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because all that complexity difference we just talked about, it really shows up when you look at how these things start up. The boot sequence. Why does my phone take like 10 or 20 seconds to boot up? But the chip controlling my car's engine or brakes needs to be ready almost instantly. The boot process tells that whole story, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The difference is night and day. The SoC boot, especially for something running Linux, is this complex, multi-stage affair.
Yeah.
It's hierarchical and has to deal with security and finding all that hardware.
So where does it begin? Power on. What's the very first thing?
It starts in the boot ROM. This is a tiny bit of code that's physically burned into the silicon at the factory. You can't change it. Its first job is usually to read some configuration, maybe some special pins or internal fuses, to figure out where it should try to load the next piece of code from. Is it an SD card, internal eMMC flash, maybe over USB? This establishes that initial security anchor, the hardware root of trust.
Okay, so it knows where to look. Then what?
Then that boot ROM code loads the first stage bootloader, often called the SPL, secondary program loader, into a small, fast internal memory, the SRAM. Now, this SPL has a really critical and often tricky job initializing the external DRAM, the DDR memory.
Ah, the memory training part.
Exactly, DDR training. Before you can load the huge Linux kernel and all the applications, you need those gigabytes of external RAM working perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
The SPL has to configure the memory controller and the memory chips themselves, making sure the signal timing is perfect. It's complex and can take a noticeable amount of time.
So arguably the riskiest part of the early boot is just getting the main memory ready.
Often, yes. If DDR training fails, the whole system just stops right there. Assuming it works, the SPL's next job is to load the next stage into that now working DDR memory.
Which is the main bootloader.
Right, the second stage bootloader. This is usually something much more capable, like U-boot, which is very common in the Linux world. U-boot is like a mini operating system itself. It initializes more of the hardware clocks, maybe the network interface if needed for network booting. And crucially, it needs to load the device tree blob, the DTB.
Ah, the DTB. That's the hardware map for Linux.
That's precisely. Instead of hard-coding hardware details into the Linux kernel itself, the DTB is a separate data file that describes everything about the specific board the kernel is running on memory addresses, which peripherals are connected to which pins, configuration details. U-boot loads this DTB into memory.
Okay, so U-boot gets the hardware ready, finds the map, then it loads the actual OS.
Then it finally copies the Linux kernel image, often compressed, like a ZImage or a UImage from storage, like eMMC or SD card, into the main DDR memory. It might do some final setup, maybe set up parameters for the kernel, and then it jumps to the kernel's entry point.
And the kernel takes over, sets up memory management, uses the DTB to find and initialize all the drivers for the hardware, mounts the root file system, and eventually starts the user applications and the graphical interface.
Phew. Yeah, it's a whole chain. And that sequence, especially the DDR training, loading large images from slower storage into RAM, and the kernel probing all the devices described in the UTB. That's why it takes seconds.
Okay, wow. Now contrast that with the MCU. How does that little controller get going so fast?
It's incredibly streamlined, built for speed and simplicity because everything's integrated.
So power on. What happened?
The CPU core simply fetches the initial stack pointer value and the address of the reset handler function directly from a fixed location in its memory map, usually right at address 0 or very close to it. This is defined by the architecture, like ARM, Cortex-M.
No looking for boot devices?
Nope. It knows exactly where to start executing code from its own internal flash memory. That reset handler code then takes over.
And what does the reset handler do?
Its job is minimal, but essential. First, it usually sets up the system clocks to run at the desired speed. Then it performs what's called C runtime initialization. This basically means preparing the memory for your C code to run. It copies any global variables that have initial values, the .data section, from the non-volatile flash memory into the faster SRAM.
Okay, copying initialized data.
And then it zeroes out another chunk of SRAM reserved for global variables that don't have initial values. That's the .bs section. Maybe initializes the floating point unit if it's going to be used.
That sounds much faster.
It is. Once that quick memory setup is done, the reset handler usually just makes a direct function call to your application's main function. Or if you're using an RTOS, it might initialize the RTOS and start its scheduler.
And that's it.
That's basically it. No external memory training. No complex bootloaders, no device trees, no loading massive kernel images, because everything code, data memory, peripherals is right there on the chip. It can be ready to execute your main application code in microseconds, or maybe a few milliseconds at most.
Which is exactly what you need if that MCU is controlling, say, your car's airbags or anti-lock brakes. You can't wait seconds for that.
Absolutely not. You need that determinism and speed.
Okay, so this lays it out really clearly. If we're looking at building a new product, how does an engineer actually decide? What are the key questions you ask to choose between a SoC and an MCU?
The number one factor, almost always, is determinism. Do you need absolutely guaranteed, predictable timing for your critical tasks? If you need a response time consistently under, say, 10 microseconds, think tight control loops for motors, high-speed data acquisition, safety-critical functions, you basically have to go with an MCU running bare metal or a proper RTOS. Linux on its SoCs just can't reliably guarantee that kind of hard real-time performance due to its scheduling and complexity.
But if a little bit of timing variation is okay.
Right. If you're dealing with soft, real-time, where maybe a response time within tens or hundreds of milliseconds is fine, like updating a display, handling user input, managing network packets, then the slight timing jitter you might get with Linux on its SO is usually acceptable.
Okay, so determinism first. What else?
Power and cost are huge. If you're building something battery-powered that needs to last for months or years, like a remote sensor, the MCU is your only real choice. They're designed for ultra-low power consumption, sometimes sipping just microamps in sleep modes.
And cost.
MCUs are generally much, much cheaper. You can get simple ones for well under $1, while more capable ones might be a few dollars, maybe up to 10 or 20 for very high-end ones. So SoCs, especially powerful ones with lots of features, can easily cost tens or even hundreds of dollars. For high-volume products, that difference is massive.
Makes sense. Then there's the feature set, right? If I need a fancy graphical interface or complex networking or video processing,
then you're almost certainly pushed towards an S-core. The raw performance, the specialized hardware blocks like GPUs and ISPs, the ability to run a full OS with complex software stacks like TCP/IP, TLS security, graphical libraries, that's the domain of the SoCs. Trying to do complex video decoding or run a modern web browser on a typical MCU would be painful, if not impossible.
So complex features point to simple control points to MCU.
Generally, yes. A smart thermostat might use an MCU for basic temperature control, but a high-end smart display thermostat with voice control and complex scheduling would likely use an SoC.
But what about devices that seem to need both, like an industrial robot controller that needs precise motor control, but also a complex user interface and network connectivity?
Great question. That's where the industry developed the hybrid solution. heterogeneous multi-core processors.
Right, these are the chips that actually put different types of cores onto the same silicon die.
Exactly. You'll find chips like NXP's IMX8 series or STMicroelectronics STM32MP1 series that combine powerful ARM Cortex-A cores for the complex stuff, right alongside one or more real-time capable ARM Cortex-M cores for the control stuff.
So you get the best of both worlds on one chip.
That's the idea. It allows for perfect software partitioning.
Yeah.
You run the big OS, like Linux, on the Cortex-A cores. Let it handle the user interface, the networking, the file system, all the high-level application logic. And then on the separate Cortex-M core, you run your critical time-sensitive code, maybe bare metal or a small RTOS like FreeRTOS, directly controlling the motors, reading sensors with precise timing, handling safety interlocks.
And how do these different worlds, the Linux side and the real-time side, talk to each other?
They typically communicate using mechanisms like shared memory regions and standardized messaging protocols, like RPMSG, remote processor messaging. This allows the Linux application to send commands or get status updates from the real-time core and vice versa.
That sounds incredibly useful, because the M core keeps running its critical tasks even if the Linux side gets busy or, I don't know, crashes.
Precisely. It provides robustness. The M core can keep the essential functions running deterministically, regardless of what the complex application processor is doing. This is huge for industrial control, automotive systems, robotics, anything where you need both rich features and guaranteed real-time operation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So to kind of wrap this up and synthesize what we've covered, if we hear SoFASI, we should think high performance, complex, probably running Linux or Android, needs external memory, has a relatively slow multi-stage boot, built for rich applications and connectivity.
Yep.
And if we hear MCU, we think dedicated control, deterministic, fast booting, self-contained with on-chip memory and peripherals, running bare metal or an RTOS, focused on reliability and specific tasks.
You've got it. That's the core distinction. And maybe that leads to a final thought for everyone listening. We tend to be impressed by the multi-gigahertz speeds and fancy features of the main processors in our devices, the big Cortex-A cores and the SoC. But often the unsung hero ensuring the whole system works reliably or handles the truly critical functions is a much simpler, faster booting microcontroller core, whether it's a standalone MCU or that little Cortex-M core hiding inside the heterogeneous SoCs. It's a really powerful reminder that in embedded systems, especially when safety or precision matters, true performance isn't always just about raw speed. It's often about determinism, doing the right thing exactly when it needs to be done every single time.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exciting updates. Your support motivates us to create valuable content. Share your feedback or topic requests in the comments. See you in the next deep dive learning or interview session.